Do your joints sometimes make loud popping sounds? And if so, does that mean you have arthritis? Or can making your joints pop cause arthritis? And if your joints do pop, will that help you in your application for Social Security disability? I'm going to answer these questions in this video. Hello, I'm John Foster. I'm a medical doctor who does Social Security disability exams, and as usual, everything I say reflects my own opinions based on my own experience and study, and not the opinions of the Social Security Administration or any other medical body. Now, every time I do a day of disability exams, I see the following scenario. A person that I'm examining moves and one of their joints makes a loud pop. They assume an expression of shock and horror and say, "Did you hear that?" And of course I did, because the noise was loud. And they assume that that loud noise will indicate that they're disabled, and probably severely so. Well, here's the truth. Loud pops from joints are normal. They happen in normal people with normal joints. And being normal will not get you approved for Social Security disability. Almost all adults have loud pops from their joints from time to time, most commonly from the knees, but it can also come from the spine, the knuckles, or any other joint in the body. It's not a sign of arthritis or any other joint problem. It's caused by nitrogen bubbles in the joint. And to explain, I have to go into a little bit of science. Our atmosphere is about 21% oxygen, the gas that we breathe, about 78% nitrogen, a gas that we can't breathe, and about 1% other, mostly argon, also helium, neon, xenon, carbon dioxide, and methane. And if the atmosphere is moist, also water vapor. The nitrogen in the air does nothing for our body, but it does dissolve in our blood. And it spreads from the blood to other tissues. Joints are composed of bone, and the parts of the bone that rub against each other are coated with a very smooth form of cartilage that resembles Teflon. And in between the two bones is some fluid called synovial fluid that resembles vegetable oil. So in a normal joint, you have two Teflon-coated bones that are lubricated with an oil. That's why normal joints can glide very smoothly and effortlessly for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of times during a person's lifetime. However, nitrogen gas does dissolve in the synovial fluid. Gases can dissolve in liquids, and the colder the liquid, the more gas will dissolve, and the higher the pressure, the more gas will dissolve. We've all experienced this when we've opened a bottle of soda or beer. When the bottle cap is on tight, the gas is under pressure in the bottle, and you don't see any bubbles in the liquid. When you open the bottle cap, you hear a hiss. That's gas under pressure escaping from the bottle, and all of a sudden, bubbles form in the liquid. Well, the same thing can happen in the synovial fluid in your joints. When you make certain movements, the pressure in the joint can suddenly decrease, and bubbles of nitrogen gas form. That process is called cavitation. And just like bubbles in a bottle of beer or soda, those bubbles can pop. And it's the nitrogen bubbles popping that causes the loud pops that you hear. It takes a while for the nitrogen gas to dissolve, about 20 minutes. And that's why, if your joint pops loudly, it either won't pop again or will only pop quietly if you try to make it pop again in a short period of time. Again, this is a normal process. It is not a sign of arthritis, and it is not a sign of disability. Also, causing your joints to pop will not cause arthritis. There was an interesting experiment done by a physician, and what he did was popped the knuckles on one of his hands every day for 40 years. And he didn't pop the knuckles on the other hand. He wanted to see if there would be a difference in the formation of arthritis in his hands. And what he found was that they were exactly the same. So, what are the actual signs of arthritis that will indicate a problem and help if you're applying for Social Security disability? Well, doctors divide signs into two types. Objective, those are the type of signs that the doctor can see, hear, feel, or smell, or also see on the results of tests, such as blood tests or x-rays. The other type of signs are what we call subjective. They rely on how the patient feels. Since we can't read minds and we have no way to measure how people feel, it's sometimes difficult to evaluate how valid subjective signs are. The objective signs are, first, deformity, such as, for example, is the joint crooked? I saw a person just a few days ago for a disability exam who had one knee that was obviously crooked. The second is swelling, and there's two types of swelling in arthritis. One is enlargement of the bones, and in that case, if you feel the joint, it feels hard, like bone, because that's what it is. It's enlargement of the bone. The other is enlargement of the soft tissues, and in that case, the joint will feel rubbery or squishy, the opposite of feeling bone. The next sign is redness, which is a sign of inflammation, and heat, which is also a sign of inflammation. A diseased joint may feel warmer than a normal joint. Another sign is what we call laxity or instability. Will a joint move in an abnormal way, a way that it shouldn't? As an example, your knee can move forward or backward, but it can only move side to side a tiny amount. If you can move the knee side to side by a large amount, that indicates joint laxity, which again I've seen in disability patients. And when those people try to walk, you can see that the lax knee is wobbly. It wobbles when they walk instead of remaining steady. The next sign is crepitus, and I think this is what popping joints gets confused with. As I've mentioned, in a normal joint, you have smooth cartilage like Teflon with a lubricating joint fluid like vegetable oil. In arthritis, that smooth Teflon becomes rough and inflamed. Imagine if you'd scratch Teflon with coarse sandpaper, and the joint fluid loses its lubricating ability. Instead of like vegetable oil, it becomes like water. In severe arthritis, all of that Teflon can be eroded away, and you wind up with bone, and those bone ends are rough, and they grate against each other. This produces a grating activity when the joint is moved. You usually can't hear it at all. Occasionally you can, but it's much fainter than the loud popping noises made by nitrogen bubbles. Usually the way to detect crepitus is by putting your hand on the joint and having the patient move the joint, and you'll feel a grating, crunching feeling in your hand. Crepitus can also be caused by tenosynovitis, bursitis, or a bone fracture where the two broken ends of the bone grate against each other. When I broke my left collarbone, I consulted a very good orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Albert Volk, and he told me that it was best to exercise with a broken collarbone because having the two ends of the bone grate against each other speeds up healing, something that I hadn't known. So I got a set of dumbbells and I lifted dumbbells every day, and I could feel the crunching of the bone ends until they got solid and completely healed. Crepitus can also be felt in a condition called subcutaneous emphysema, which is when air bubbles get under the skin. Two causes of subcutaneous emphysema are a punctured lung, such as a rib fracture that punctures a lung, or a stab wound to the chest, or gas gangrene, where bacteria form gas underneath the skin. Finally, we come to range of motion. Can the joint go through a full range of motion, or a restricted range of motion, or an abnormally large range of motion? And this can be a difficult thing because sometimes the range of motion is objectively a problem. For example, in ankylosis, when a joint won't move at all, and the doctor can push and pull till the cows come home on the joint, and it won't budge. People can be born with an ankylosed joint. Ankylosis can develop from illness or injury, or it can be at the result of surgery. Sometimes doctors fuse a joint. For example, I had a person who had a very bad ankle fracture. The doctors tried to fix it surgically, but it just didn't work, and the person had a lot of pain every time they took a step and could barely walk. So the doctors did another operation where they fused the ankle so it wouldn't move at all, and therefore the person was able to walk. They couldn't walk completely normally, but for them it was a lot better than walking with agony with every step. However, in most cases, joint limitation of range of motion is subjective. The joint range of motion is limited by pain. Usually in such a case, the person can move the joint more, but the pain gets worse and worse. And in this case, the doctor has to evaluate whether the limitation of range of motion the person is indicating is real or not. And in most cases that I've seen, it is real, but I have had people who indicated a limited range of motion who were phony as a $3 bill. I've described one of them in previous videos, a man I observed to have a full range of motion of his shoulders on multiple occasions when he didn't know I was observing him, and then indicated a very limited range of motion during my exam. And then the final subjective sign is tenderness. Does it hurt if the doctor presses on or squeezes the joint? Again, this depends on how the person feels, and it has to be evaluated by the doctor in terms of how credible they believe the person is. Well, I hope this has been helpful. If you found it interesting, you might want to subscribe. I generally put out one disability-related video every Friday. And as always, remember, if it happens, it's possible.